Hi, I'm Peter Rowland.
And I'm Katie Steckles. And Peter, what's today's mathematical object?
Today's most mathematical of objects is a plate of biscuits. And to talk about this plate of biscuits and what we might notice and wonder about it, we have special guest Alison Kiddle. Hi, Alison.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, so the plate of biscuits then. Shall I start by describing it, just in case anyone's not seen the picture?
Yes, please.
Okay, so the plate of biscuits, it's got two custard creams, which are rectangular biscuits. They're three-dimension, but we're looking down on top of the plate of biscuits. So they're rectangular. I'd say probably about 3:2 aspect ratio. I'm not sure. Might need to get the ruler out and measure that one. And then there's also a rectangular shortbread on the plate, which is a bit longer and thinner. It's a similar width to the custard cream, but a bit longer. And I've arranged 4 of them on a plate. So 2 custard creams and 2 shortbread biscuits.
We are the idiots who made a podcast where we describe objects on the audio. Yeah. But you're excellent at that.
That was a real mathematician's description of an object. That was good. Well, they are 3D, but we don't care about that for this. Yeah.
Yeah, so this came about because at the start of lockdown, way back when, I got very, very bored and I wanted to post some pictures on Twitter to show the maths that I was working on. But most of the maths I was working on wasn't really the sort of thing that could go on Twitter. I was doing a lot of website stuff. It was back when I worked at Enrich. And it wasn't the most sharey kind of thing. But I realised that every morning I was stopping at about 11 o'clock for a coffee break and I was having biscuits. And I was arranging these biscuits on the plate because I do. If I've got biscuits, I will arrange them mathematically. And I thought I could share these pictures with other people. And there's a thing in Maths Education Twitter of posing the questions, what do you notice and what do you wonder? So I just started putting these up with the caption. And it generated lots of discussion. People really wanted to talk about what they noticed about my biscuits. So this particular one, I arranged the biscuits in 2 different ways. The first way was to put the 4 biscuits around in a rectangle. So the 2 custard creams sort of top right and bottom left, and then the 2 shortbreads bottom right and top left. And then I also arranged them in what I kind of refer to as a windmill pattern. So the 4 biscuit corners meeting in the middle but going out in spokes, a little bit like a windmill. And the fact that they could be arranged in 2 different ways generated some really interesting mathematical discussion.
I mean, I realised that the point of this is that I'm meant to notice things, but I've literally just noticed that the bottom custard cream in both pictures is upside down, and because they say the word custard cream in the middle, like they have an orientation, like they have 2 different ways up they can be, which means that the whole thing has a sort of rotational symmetry, which I find incredibly satisfying.
I'm really glad you noticed that, Katie, because that was 100% deliberate.
And presumably you've done the same thing with the shortbreads. You've made sure that you've turned one of them round. Yeah.
Yes, this caused consternation when I first posted this picture, because somebody pointed out that there's like a little dotty pattern on the top of the shortbread biscuits, and it's not exactly the same on every biscuit. And we actually did get a biscuit expert responding to the thread to talk about how you have to make these little indentations so that it will cook evenly and properly, but then it does break the symmetry of it. So
but surely that's not done by hand. It's not someone sat there poking individual holes. There's presumably like a stamp that comes in with the holes.
Yes, it's going to be a stamp, but I think because of the way that things shift slightly, it means that they're not perfectly uniform on every biscuit, which is deeply dissatisfying.
This raises questions about which is the most mathematically precise biscuit. Which ones have perfect symmetry and which ones don't. Interesting.
Well, the custard cream has writing on it. So
well, true, yeah, that's ruined it
immediately.
If you ignore that, yeah.
Bourbons are no good because they have writing on as well. In fact, quite a lot of biscuits have writing on.
Malted milk's useless. There's just a picture of a cow.
Yeah. But the good news there is that it does mean that you have to do what I've done here, which is that if you want to create a pattern with rotational symmetry, you have to have multiple copies of the same biscuit. You can't do it with just one biscuit, which for people who like to have more than one biscuit with their coffee break is really good news, I think.
Yeah, I think 4 is a good number. Four is the correct number of biscuits to have in one go, I think.
I mean, it does prompt something else that I've been thinking about a lot lately, which is what counts as a large number or a small number. And I think in the case of biscuits, 4 is getting sort of up there towards a large number of biscuits to have. But whether a number is large or small is so context dependent, I think.
Yeah, but I mean, if you've got 3 biscuits, you can always argue, I need there to be rotational symmetry in my arrangement of biscuits, therefore I must have a 4th biscuit. So it's completely legit, yeah.
I can't take my eyes off the 4 little dots and the 3 little dots now that you pointed it out. It's dreadful. Yeah. I've also never really thought about the pattern on the custard creams. I was just looking at that.
Yeah, it's very intricate, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Quite a ornate Regency biscuits.
It's symmetrical, I think.
I think so, yeah. It's got, yeah.
Except for the writing.
I mean, it makes me wonder whether it's the same pattern on every different brand of custard cream, because I suspect a lot of them are made in the same factory.
Yes.
But then, you get into sampling issues. How many of these packets would I have to buy in order to be able to start saying things about whether they were made in the same factory or not?
Yeah.
Consistency across custard creams.
I'm now wondering if the detail in that pattern means that the experience of eating the biscuit, like whether the texture of it is affected by that, and whether it means there's more air introduced, or whether it breaks differently based on the pattern, or...
I mean, that's really interesting, because I'm convinced that custard creams go soggier quicker than every other biscuit, but I've never rigorously tested that. That's just, my anecdotal evidence. But it really feels as if there is a lot to be studied at every mathematical level about biscuits.
Well, I mean, there's whole, food science is a whole area of science, right? There are people, I know mathematicians who work for bakeries who do this kind of stuff and analyse these things. But I guess it's partly, obviously, that's a sort of materials science, chemistry almost aspect to it as well. But the sort of physical characteristics of things. So I guess this is the point here, right? That there is maths in everything if you stop and think about it for a second. And it's also not the kind of maths that people think of when they think about maths, because everyone's sort of talking about quantities and calculations and arithmetic.
Yeah, there are 4 things, right? So 4.
That's maths. Yeah. But yeah, there's a more kind of the way that mathematicians sort of pull things apart in their minds, and I guess you have to, because that is literally the point of maths, is that you if you're given a mathematical structure or something you're studying, your job is then to look at it and go, oh, why does it do that, and what would happen if I did this, and why, how are those patterns in there? This is the game, isn't it? I guess.
So we'll put a link to the website that you've got with a whole load of different pictures on this, but some of them are sort of drain cover images which have these fascinating patterns on that you just think, there's something about the manufacturing of it, there's something about the strength of the material, all that sort of thing. But that's a very sort of real world modelling end of things. The other thing is, I'm looking at the first picture where they're arranged in a rectangle, and because the custard cream, as you say, has this 3:2 ratio, and the other one has about a 2:1 ratio, I'd say, and that means the gap in the middle where they don't quite lock together is a rectangle. And so I'm sort of fascinated by the geometry of that rectangle in relation to those other quantities, because that's what's formed them, right?
I guess what I'm wondering now is, are any of the sort of interesting standard rectangles? So you've got the golden rectangle, where if you cut a square off it, you get the same ratio rectangle, and you've got the A4 paper ratio, which is 1:2, where if you fold it in half, you get 2 of the same rectangle. And do people who design biscuits think about these things and deliberately make the biscuits in these nice ratios? Like if I cut a custard cream in half, would I have 2 smaller custard creams? Or I mean, yeah.
I mean, I think, yeah, you've started to get into some of the sorts of questions that I wanted people to ask about these biscuits. And what I like about the notice and wonder prompt is that it gives you freedom to explore whatever direction you want to. And a lot of people's first instinct is not even to pose a mathematical question. The first things that you notice about a situation, unless you happen to already be quite heavily invested in mathematics, the first thing you notice might not be very mathematical. But I like the idea of particularly getting children and young people to be generating their own mathematical questions to explore. And so you start off asking non-mathematical things, but over the course of those conversations, questions that might be resolved mathematically start to come out. And I'm really glad you mentioned modelling, Peter, because I think the idea of mathematical modelling is something that you can do at quite a young age with children, and yet we don't attach the name mathematical modelling to that process until much later on. So the idea of looking at this and saying, what is that rectangle in the middle? Well, we'd need to measure the photograph and we'd need to draw it out and we'd need to start calculating. But then we could abstract and we could say, well, if I had the dimensions of the two rectangles and I put them together, well, first of all, can I always make a bigger rectangle with a smaller rectangle in the middle? Or is it possible to choose biscuit sizes where they'd fit exactly and there wouldn't be a rectangle in the middle? And then all of a sudden we're moving away from the biscuit context and we're exploring something on squared paper, and then at some point we have to translate it back and pose the question, so what does this mean for the biscuit manufacturers of the world?
Yeah, I mean, so I've noticed you kind of posting these things on Twitter over the last however long, and I've kind of started doing it now in my own life. And what I mean by that is probably I've noticed that I'm doing it in my own life. Like, this is probably something that I was always doing. But literally yesterday, I had a bottle of barbecue sauce and I noticed that on the side it said 31 servings, which I guess means apparently someone who works for the barbecue sauce company has decided how much barbecue sauce is one serving of barbecue sauce. And my immediate thought was, I wonder whether that is in any way commensurate with the amount of barbecue sauce I would put on something. Like, is this? And we looked, and it turns out they think that 15 grams of barbecue sauce is one serving. Because you get this a lot, don't you? You get like a box of chocolates and it says recommended serving 2 chocolates. And you're like, no.
Yeah.
What?
Because they have to put the nutritional information on the front, and they've basically got a target number that they want it to be. They want it to be not in the red category or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So they sort of say, this tiny thing serves 4 people. And you sort of,
it's fine that we're selling people a box of fat and sugar because we expect that they will only eat 2 at a time.
Yes.
So it's fine.
But you've got a nice discrete and continuous thing there, Katie, because with washing powder, back before they'd invented all the little washing tablets and the little gel capsules, you used to just get a big tub of washing powder, and it would say on it the number of washes, because you would dose it with the little cup. But of course, if you lived in a hard water or a soft water area, it might be more or less than that. So that was only really an average number of washes. But now they're packaged in this discrete way, where discrete packaging, where you have a tablet that you throw in the thing, or one of the little gel things that you just throw in, and you don't have the opportunity to change the amount you use. So it still says on the box 20 washes, but you can't. It's not an average anymore. It's like an absolute.
You can only double it up or nothing. Yeah, we have a box of powder with a scoop, and we put 1 bit of this scoop in, or 3/4 of a scoop in, or whatever, depending on the size of the load. But yeah, you're right. You can't do that. The thing that fascinates me as well, and why I think it's a target for nutritional information anyway for food. The reason I think it's a target is because often the recommended serving doesn't divide into the size of the packet. You get this quite a lot with stuff where it's like, all right, this yogurt is, whatever per serving, but actually that means I'm going to have some left over. What do I do with that bit? Or that means I'm going to have half a serving at the end or something.
Yeah, well, the bottle of barbecue sauce was unaccountably 465 grams, which means it was exactly 31 servings at 15 grams.
Yeah.
But you wonder if that's just a function of the size of the bottle that they were using, or whether because I guess 31 is a number that can change. But it was it's like you see this on toilet rolls as well, because they say, like, you look at the packet and sometimes they have quite a lot of information. They have like the number of sheets on a roll and the number of rolls in a packet and that kind of thing. And you because you don't know how big the hole is in the middle of a toilet roll. There's all kinds of great maths questions about a packet of toilet rolls, like how long would it be if I rolled it all out and all of this kind of thing.
Like, I noticed one of the pictures on your website is of a block of cheese, and it's 400 grams of cheese, and the serving size is 30 grams. So that's 13 1/3 servings, right?
Well, I mean, the thing is, you don't ever buy just one block of cheese, though, do you?
Yeah, so you...
Well, I don't.
It's 13 servings, and then you eat a bit of cheese, right? That's the standard. Yeah. Now, the fascinating thing, the reason I found the block of cheese was I noticed quite a lot of companies have started doing this now, where they're reducing the weight of the plastic. And so they've changed the standard dimensions of the block of cheese, because you used to get sort of flattish cuboids with a large surface area, and now they're more squarish in cross section. So the standard surface area of a block of cheese has changed, and that's only happened. Well, I've only noticed it in the last 18 months or so, that everyone seems to have started changing the shape of their cheese.
Yes, this was fascinatingly investigated on Beck Hill and Matt Parker's podcast, Problem Squared. But there was a sort of, I think it was Matt who phoned up the company and had a good old chat with them about, it's not just about the amount of plastic the thing is wrapped in, but it's also then the fact that they've taken the zipper off, and the fact that they now have an object that they can stack more efficiently in a lorry. And it's all sort of interrelated stuff. It's fascinating. Yeah.
We had a mathematical moment when the jars of mango chutney were on 3 for 2. It was a big day. So we got a mango chutney and a mango and pomegranate and something else, like a lime pickle. And the hexagonal jars. And we kind of put them down on the table, and they all just fit together perfectly. And we're like, this is incredibly efficient, but also you'll never get it out of the corners of the jars when you're trying to get a spoon in to get the last bit of chutney out. But
that's in the manufacturer's interest, isn't it? For there to be a little bit in the jar that you can't get out. It might not be very environmentally sound, but it's really good for their product margins. So.
Yeah.
So this sort of thing can spontaneously occur. I'm reminded of just the other day, my son was bouncing around the kitchen floor like he does, and the kitchen the pattern on the kitchen floor is sort of offset rectangles, and he's bouncing around, and he suddenly looked up at me and he said, "A knight moves just like a bishop moves," and he's talking about chess pieces, and he showed me, and I said, "Yeah, on this floor it does, but a chessboard isn't like this floor, right?" And he said, "What do you mean?" And so I sent him off, and he got the chessboard out, and he came back after a bit, and he said, "Oh yeah, I see what you mean." it's because they weren't lined up perfectly. The knight's move was just a diagonal move. If you sort of went 2 that way and 1 that way, you ended up on a diagonal, and that sort of thing is fascinating. And you can then sort of involve him in a conversation about the pattern that he's noticed and things like that. But there's also a way of using these. You're talking about using these as prompts, right? So if you're in a classroom, you might bring something in. And, I mean, how does that work when you've got 30 minds all coming at this from different directions?
Well, I think if a teacher chooses a particular picture, there's usually going to be a particular mathematical conversation that they want to have. And it's important to have the time with the openness, with everybody genuinely talking about what they notice and what they wonder.
And sort of no wrong answers, improv rules kind of.
Yeah, and I've suggested to teachers that you can just gather all of the suggestions together and then say, well, obviously we don't have time to explore them all, so we're going to focus our attention on this particular aspect of it, and promise to come back to it another day maybe, which of course you then never do. But yes, so sometimes that can actually be really empowering as an educator, because children will notice things and pose questions that you hadn't even thought of, and then you think, well, actually we will come back to this, because the question you've just asked, I wanted to focus on rotational symmetry, but the question you've just asked would be a really good one to think about when we're studying area. And it's also showing this idea, and I don't always use the notice and wonder prompts. Sometimes instead I've asked questions like, what do you notice? What questions do you think are mathematically interesting? Or what might a mathematician find interesting about this picture?
Stop talking about how soggy this biscuit gets and tell me something mathematical.
Yeah, the aim is to obviously get children to be thinking about themselves as mathematicians, but until they're ready to take that step, then you can have this sort of fictional mathematician, and the sort of things mathematicians care about is symmetry and classification, and being able to calculate the key attributes of something. So you have this script of the sort of things a mathematician would find interesting, and you encourage students to think along those lines.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to build this in myself. I'm just thinking about a workshop that I've got to run soon, and I'm sort of... part of the point at the start is I give them a sort of puzzle to work on, but it's deliberately something that's a bit open-ended, because I want to make the point that the way mathematicians do research is that they kind of see a pattern, or they see a thing that they might want to investigate further. And normally I just say, can you solve this problem, and give them a bit of time to work on it. I kind of give them a cut-down version of the question. And my hope is that during the time they're thinking about that all of these sort of thoughts come in, and I can then say, and you might imagine you can extend this in these different ways, but I'm thinking about actually just adding in the question. I want you to come back with A, an answer to this problem, and B, a question that is a thing that your brain goes, oh, I wonder if this, or I wonder what happens if I do that, kind of thing. And I'm hoping that'll give them, like, giving them a prompt to come up with a question like that is a really mathematical thing to do. I guess it's the way that mathematicians think, and I really like getting that across to people, because it's that imagination that mathematics is all about, getting the right answer the first time, and thinking in a very logical kind of computery way, and not having any imagination, whereas in fact it is really about sparking off things that you wonder about.
Yeah, and I think that's why picture prompts can be a really good way into this, particularly I say particularly with younger students, but actually I think there's something quite engaging about something visually appealing for any age of human. And yes, this idea about generating questions, and the creativity and the slightly off-piste nature of it shows a different strand of mathematics that maybe isn't always present in the way textbooks present maths. Yeah,
definitely. We have a final year module that we invented called Game Theory and Recreational Mathematics, which is there's quite a lot of stuff in that which is quite sort of free and open, and let's look at this game. How do you think the pieces of this game were, why do you think they are the way they are, or play this game and try and think about how the rules might be tweaked and things like that. And part of that is to try and get this sort of open creativity and sort of play-based sort of stuff going on. And one of the people who teaches that with me referred to it as a totally authentic experience for a mathematician being in that room. I just think that's lovely. It's the sort of thing Katie was talking about, that this is, because I think they were playing some variant of noughts and crosses that I just taught them. The two people who teach it with me were kind of distracted playing that on the board while the students were all doing something. And yeah, I think he just found it very sort of lots of questions, lots of noticing and wondering, and it's nice that you can do that, as you say, with any age of humans and any sort of mathematical ability.
Yeah, and I think it also applies across different types of maths as well, because I'm thinking about this as a pure mathematician, and I'm very much imagining somebody spotting a pattern in the integers or something. But of course, if you're trying to model a real world problem, it's important to be able to analyse the situation and notice different aspects of it, and kind of think about how they might be related to each other and what you might need to include in your model. So
absolutely, and what's important and what's not important about this situation. Yeah, definitely. So,
of course, those of course the two types of maths: number theory and modelling of physical systems. Of course, yeah.
Good.
So, if people want to find more things to notice and wonder about, or follow you on Twitter or anything like that, what's the best way for them to do that, Alison?
So I'm on Twitter at Alison Kiddle. I post things like this occasionally as and when I see them. So if you go back through my old tweets, you'll find some of them. But I'm also trying to curate a page on my website with them, with noticing and wondering pictures, which I'm trying to remember to update every time I've posted a chunk more on Twitter, but there are also lots of other places around on the web. And if you follow me on Twitter and look at the sort of things that I'm retweeting, or just look for Notice and Wonder hashtags and so on, you can find lots of other people doing this as well.
That's brilliant. So we're also on Twitter. I'm at Peter Rowlett.
And I'm at Stex.
And the podcast itself is at Maths Objects.
And both Peter and I blog at the Aperiodical, which is aperiodical.com, and that's where you can also find more episodes of this podcast. And if you want to get in touch with us, if you have any things that you have noticed or wondered that you want to let us know about, or any thoughts or suggestions for future objects to feature, then you can get in touch by emailing objects@aperiodical.com.
The music is Funk Game Loop by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons.